The council chamber in Camelot was silent, the air thick with anticipation. King Arthur sat tense on his throne, eyes fixed on the ancient emerald dragon Frederick coiled before him. The knights and Merlin waited, breathless, as Arthur finally spoke. "Frederick, we have faced many foes, but none like Seraphina. If she was once a dragon of wisdom and light, tell us, how did she fall so far?" The fate of Camelot, perhaps all mortal kind, hung on Frederick's answer. The question echoed, how does light become darkness? Frederick, the Emerald Dragon, prepared to speak of an age long since passed into myth. Frederick's golden eyes dimmed, shadows of ancient sorrow flickering within. He sighed, his voice rumbling like shifting mountains. "You wish to know the truth? Then hear of the age of fire." The chamber faded. The council was drawn into a vision, swept back through time by the dragon's living memory. They saw a world before Camelot, before men ruled. An age of dragons, vibrant and raw. Humanity was scattered tribes, dwarfed by the wars of fire and scale. This was the world that birthed both Frederick and the shadow now threatening their own time. The vision solidified, an endless blue sky, dragons soaring. A young Emerald Frederick flew beside radiant Seraphina, her silver scales dazzling in the sun. Below, dragons clashed in endless war, fire of every colour consuming the land. Frederick and Seraphina descended not as conquerors, but as peacekeepers, twin flames against chaos. Their unity was a dance of power and purpose, striving to end the cycle of destruction. In this age, they were inseparable allies, fighting for the soul of their kind. The vision shifted to the ground, where dragons gathered around Frederick and Seraphina, hope in their eyes. Frederick's voice echoed, "There was a time when Seraphina was my sister in all but blood." Their bond was unbreakable, their trust absolute. Seraphina moved among the wounded, her magic healing, her presence a balm. She inspired with compassion and vision, promising a future of peace. In those moments, she was not a warrior, but a healer and a beacon of hope. On a windswept plateau at sunset, Frederick and Seraphina dreamed of a world beyond war. Seraphina spoke of dragons as guardians, not tyrants, of cities of learning, of peace. Frederick pledged his strength to her vision. Together, they believed they could end the bloodshed. The clans were uniting, the wars ending. Peace was within reach. In Frederick's memory, Seraphina shone as a beacon for all dragonkind. There was no sign of the darkness that would one day consume her. The vision began to darken. A subtle change crept into the memory. Smoke began to blot out the sun, casting the world in a gloomy twilight. A shadow had begun to fall. Frederick narrated the darkening scene. The peace we had fought for, it was not enough for her. The memory showed a Seraphina whose demeanor had shifted, overlaid with a restless intensity. This disquiet grew into a dangerous obsession. She sought a power that burned deeper. It was a fire drawn from the cold, silent void between the stars, a forbidden power. Her quest for this dark power began to change her. Her focus shifted to securing it against any possible future threat. The dream of a harmonious future was slowly being poisoned by paranoia. The memory plunged into a ruined, subterranean cavern, a forgotten wound where no light touched for millennia. Unnatural violet flames cast monstrous shadows on damp stone walls covered in ancient jagged runes. These symbols whispered insidious thoughts, promising power for a sliver of one's soul. At the heart stood Seraphina, her scales reflecting the unholy light, tracing the forbidden runes. She was enthralled, lost in the whispers, believing she secured her people's future. Frederick watched from the threshold, feeling the cavern's wrongness. He had to stop her before the abyss consumed her. "Seraphina!" My cry echoed, filled with desperate urgency. I could see the power coiled around her, promising everything while sinking its fangs into her spirit. "This magic corrupts. It is a lie, Seraphina. It twists the very essence of our being." Her eyes were filled with the unnatural light of the void. "With this power we will never lose again," she said, her voice a discordant harmony. "No enemy shall ever rise against us, don't you see? This is the only true path to peace, an absolute, everlasting peace." The words she spoke were a horrifying perversion of everything we had fought for. The peace she described was not the dream we had shared. It was a piece of chains and fire. Peace, I repeated, my voice trembling. You call this peace? This is tyranny, a cage built from fear. I begged her to see that she was becoming the very thing we had sworn to destroy. I saw then that I could not reach her. Her desire for peace had become so absolute that she was willing to sacrifice the very soul of our people to achieve it. The chasm that was opening between us was an impassable ideological abyss. The memory lurched forward. The vision showed a sky that burned with a sick black fire. Dragons screamed as they fell from this blighted sky. This was an extermination. At the head of this onslaught stood Seraphina, a figure of terrifying power. Fire poured from her wings, a dark, consuming torrent of shadow. Where once there had been life, there was now only a spreading wasteland. She led an army of puppets, their wills subsumed by her own. They were the hollowed-out shells of the very dragons she had once sworn to protect. I watched this horrifying spectacle unfold. The Seraphina I knew was gone. Now the entire world was paying the price for my failure. The final confrontation was inevitable. The memory focused on a vast, shattered plain, a place that might once have been a beautiful valley. Now it was a battlefield of utter ruin. The ground was a carpet of grey ash, punctuated by the jagged stumps of petrified forests and the skeletal remains of fallen dragons. The rivers did not flow with water, but with a sluggish, boiling sludge. The very air was toxic, shimmering with a heat that offered no warmth, only pain. This was the heart of Seraphina's new dominion. This was the final battleground for the soul of their world, the last stand against the encroaching silent dark. Frederick landed upon this desolate stage. His emerald scales, once a symbol of fiery youth, now seemed like the last spark of defiance in a dying world. He was older now, the weight of this long, drawn-out war etched upon his features. He was no longer the hopeful warrior, but a grim executioner tasked with destroying the one he loved most. He stood alone, a remnant of the old world, a living memory of a time of honor and free will. He was all that was left of the resistance. All others had been consumed, converted, or had fled to parts of the world she had not yet touched. Then she descended from the black sky. Seraphina, a queen landing in her conquered territory. Her obsidian form was immense, larger than she had ever been, swollen with the power of the void. She moved with a chilling, silent grace, her shadow falling across the battlefield like a final curtain. The army of enthralled dragons hovered behind her, a silent, waiting swarm, their collective gaze fixed upon the lone dissenter who dared to defy their empress. They did not need to fight. This was a personal matter, a final, bitter conversation between two beings who had once been two halves of the same whole. The silence that fell between them was heavier than any mountain. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of their shared past, the memory of battles fought side by side, of dreams shared under a setting sun. All of it had led to this. One a champion of life and freedom, the other a messiah of control and death. The two ultimate expressions of dragonkind, poised to annihilate one another upon a world they had both tried to save in their own way. The Age of Fire was not just a war of armies, it was a war of philosophies, and this was its apocalyptic conclusion. You have become the very thing we swore to destroy. Frederick's roar was a blast of pure, unadulterated grief and fury. It was not just a challenge, it was an accusation, a final, desperate appeal to the sister he believed was still buried somewhere within that monstrous form. His voice was the sound of a breaking heart, the cry of a world resisting its own end. As he roared, a torrent of clean, golden fire erupted from his throat, a brilliant stream of life and warmth that cut a path through the oppressive gloom, momentarily illuminating the desolate landscape with the light of a forgotten sun. Seraphina answered, and her voice was a terrifying chorus, echoing with the cold, empty power of the void. "And you," she replied, her tone devoid of all emotion save for a chilling, absolute certainty, "are too weak to see the truth." Her own roar was not a sound but an anti-sound, a wave of pure silence and shadow that seemed to drain the very energy from the air. Dark fire, a vortex of violet and black energy, met his golden flame in the space between them. The impact was cataclysmic. Fire and shadow clashed like thunder, their elemental forces tearing at the fabric of reality itself. Their battle shook the very foundations of the earth. They took to the sky, their titanic forms colliding amidst the swirling black clouds. Every clash of claw on scale sent shockwaves that leveled the remaining jagged peaks on the horizon. Mountains that had stood for eons crumbled into dust. Rivers, already boiling, were vaporized in an instant, their empty beds cracking under the strain of the warring energies. The sky itself seemed to split in two, one side burning with the last defiant light of the sun, the other consumed by the encroaching, absolute darkness of the void. This was not a battle of strength or skill alone. It was a war between two fundamental forces. Frederick fought with the fire of life, the passion of memory, and the righteous fury of the betrayed. His every blow was a desperate attempt to break the spell, to reach the person within. Seraphina fought with the cold, unfeeling logic of the abyss. Her movements were perfect, efficient, and utterly without passion. She was not fighting a brother, she was excising a flaw in her perfect design, a final variable that needed to be erased from the equation. As their apocalyptic duel raged, Frederick realized he could not win. She was stronger. The power she drew from the void was limitless, a bottomless well of cold, dark energy. His own power, drawn from his heart and the life of the world, was finite. He was growing weary, his flames burning less brightly with each desperate volley. He could see the end approaching, his own destruction and the final triumph of her silent, grey peace. In that moment of grim clarity, he knew he had only one option left. It was not a weapon to win the fight, but a tool to save what little was left of her. He gathered all his remaining strength, not into his claws or his fire, but into his voice. He unleashed one final, monumental roar. But this roar was different. It was not a sound of anger or defiance. It was a roar of pure, unfiltered memory. He poured every shared moment they ever had into that sound, the vision of them flying side by side as emerald and silver youths. The quiet conversations on the sun-drenched plateau, the shared laughter, the shared dreams, the unbreakable bond they once had. He projected the memory of the Seraphina she used to be directly into her corrupted soul. For a single solitary instant the attack broke through. The cold violet light in Seraphina's eyes flickered, the obsidian sheen of her scales wavered, and for a heartbeat a flash of pure silver shone through. A tremor of confusion and pain ran through her immense form. The whispers of the void in her mind were momentarily silenced by the overwhelming truth of what she had lost, of what she had destroyed. The monster faltered, and the sister remembered. In that moment a single crystalline tear, shimmering with the light of a lost star, traced a path through the ash on her monstrous cheek. It was only a moment, but it was enough. The shock of her own identity, the sudden crushing weight of her crimes, shattered her concentration. The void, momentarily denied its perfect vessel, recoiled. The dark power within her became unstable, turning upon itself. With a final, agonized scream that was a mixture of her own voice and the shriek of 1,000 dying stars, her form imploded. The ensuing blast was not of fire or shadow, but of pure, raw energy that scoured the battlefield clean. The Age of Fire, this long and terrible war, drew to its bitter, tragic end, not with a victory, but with a shattering. The vision dissolved. The familiar reality of Camelot's council chamber returned, yet everything felt different. The air itself seemed heavier now, saturated with the echoes of a world-shattering tragedy. The silence was born of shock and profound sorrow. The knights of the Round Table stood frozen. They had lived the soul-crushing despair of the final battle. King Arthur sat rigid, his fingers wrapped tightly around the hilt of Excalibur. He had asked for the truth, and I had given it to him. Merlin, too, looked truly haunted. He knew the danger it represented, a danger that had not ended with Seraphina's demise. I, Frederick, slowly lifted my head from the stone floor, weary. My golden eyes, luminous with sadness, were the eyes of a brother who had been forced to destroy his own sister. She was not always a monster, my voice rumbled. The words were a soft lament for the silver dragon who had once flown at my side, radiant and full of hope. Once, she was the greatest of us, the brightest, the best. And it was I confessed, who failed to turn her from her path. I had pleaded with her, but I had failed to reach her. In my mind, her corruption, the war, the shattering of the world, it was all my fault. King Arthur rose slowly. He moved with a deliberate grace. He looked at me not as a weapon, but as a fellow soul who had seen the horrors of war. "Then we do not face a foe born of evil alone," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We face a foe born of tragedy." This was not a simple fight of good versus evil. It was far more complicated. Merlin nodded gravely in agreement. "And that, Arthur," the wizard added, "may make her all the more dangerous. An enemy born of corrupted ideals is unpredictable. Their pain can become a source of immense, chaotic power. Their tragedy makes them a wound in the world." As if orchestrated by some cosmic playwright, the storm that had been threatening Camelot all evening finally broke. A deafening clap of thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the very foundations of the castle. It was a sound that mirrored the cataclysmic clash we had just witnessed in my memory. Rain began to lash against the high windows of the council chamber, driven by a furious wind. The elements themselves seemed to be weeping for the tragedy that had been recounted. A symphony of nature's grief for an age of lost potential and a shattered world. The storm outside was a perfect reflection of the turmoil within each person in the room. Within the chamber, no one spoke further. There was nothing left to say. The story had been told. The truth had been revealed. The weight of it pressed down on us, silencing all thought of strategy or immediate plans. Each of us was lost in our own reflections, processing the horrifying implications of what we had learned. The shadow that threatened our kingdom was not a new darkness, but an old one, a sorrow that had festered for eons. It was an ancient wound that had been torn open once more, threatening to bleed its poison across our own time. We had sought knowledge to prepare for a war, but the knowledge we received had transformed the nature of the conflict entirely. We were not just fighting a rogue dragon. We were confronting the legacy of the Age of Fire. We were standing against the echo of a broken heart, the ghost of a corrupted dream. The battle ahead would be fought not only with swords and shields, but with understanding and perhaps even pity. But how could we pity a force that sought our complete and utter annihilation? The paradox was a knot that could not be easily untangled. King Arthur, Merlin, and the silent knights of the Round Table all stood listening to the raging storm, each coming to the same grim, unspoken conclusion. The battle between Seraphina and myself, the one that had crumbled mountains and boiled rivers, had not truly ended the conflict. It had only paused it. The Age of Fire had not been extinguished in that final terrible blast. It had merely been sleeping, biding its time in the silent void, waiting for a chance to rise again. And now, in our time, it was beginning to stir. The storm was not just over Camelot. A far greater storm was coming for the entire world.